The world wants more and more data at the edge of their network.
Working out how it best benefits you.
We are in the fourth industrial revolution, Industry 4.0, and it's a slow progression, but the COVID pandemic basically altered that steady transition.
And each one of those occurrences is like a $10 million problem.
Welcome to the 2021 Automatic Identification Teachers Institute Virtual Edition, brought to you by the Material Handling Education Foundation, AIM, and the AIDC 100.
Okay, where are my parts? Where are things moving from zone 1 to zone 2? How do I track all this stuff?
Welcome to the 2021 Automatic Identification Teachers Institute. My name is Kevin Barisso, and I am the director of the AutoID lab at the University of Memphis. In this episode of the AITI, we will be discussing why companies use automatic identification. Automatic identification is a collection of enabling tools that allow companies to be more efficient, faster, more accurate, and ultimately more profitable. The technologies that make up automatic identification include barcodes, radio frequency identification, magnetic stripe, smart cards, biometrics, and more. Throughout this series, we will be discussing these various technologies, but before we get started, I found that it makes more sense to lay the groundwork of why we really care. The following discussions are with various industry leaders. They help to catch mistakes before they impact others, and they allow individuals and companies to provide the right service or the right product at the right time and in a manner that is of value to the end user or customer. And so the question really is, why are companies using the various automatic identification and data capture, or AIDC, technologies?
The large logistics companies that fulfill our orders in a day or so, and all the challenges, or buy online and pick it up in the store. Our life has changed, not just because of COVID, but certainly because of COVID. But even without COVID, it probably would have changed anyways. And so it requires that additional visibility to know where the edge of my network, where are all my parts, where are my workers, where are my workers' mobile computers, what should my workers be doing next, which we call next best action. So, you've got a whole set of staff people at a retail store, and they're like, there's 100 things I could do. What's the most important, valuable one I could do next? So that's what we're all about, is giving that kind of visibility to the edge of the network, and more the intelligence to our customers to what is that we can advise our customers about the next best action for their workers to be able to be very efficient and not waste their time.
There are really 7 specific challenges that come up all the time. The first one is meeting evolving regulations and standards. It requires a certain agility. Regulations are changing all the time, every day, particularly for our customers that operate globally, having to comply with, a host of different regulations that vary, sometimes only in a nuanced way, from geography to geography to geography. And again, the fact that they change requires agility. The interesting thing about these regulations, in the U.S., we think of regulatory bodies like FDA, but it's not just the regulating industry that sets standards that industry needs to comply with. Retailers, for example, a few years ago, Walmart decided that every case of produce that they were going to accept into their warehouses anywhere in the world had to have a label formatted a certain way. We call it in our software the Walmart label, right? But now that label, because everybody wants to sell into Walmart, and nobody wants to have to manage a bunch of different kinds of labels for every retailer that's at that part of their supply chain. Now this label has become standard for produce. So you don't just see it at Walmart, you see it at Safeway, you see it at Kroger, you see it at Costco. So that's a way that industry mandates standards, and also industry associations do as well. We see oftentimes industry associations come up with a particular standard to get out ahead of the regulator, like FDA or the aerospace industry regulatory bodies. They anticipate that regulations are going to be handed down to meet certain needs. And so they will come up with their own standard, if you will, just so they can show the regulator, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the best practice for our industry. And oftentimes the regulatory body will adopt that as a standard. So evolving regulations and standards. Another challenge is barcode issues. So interesting here is most FDA recalls are from labeling errors. And Kinsey actually in a recent study says that medical device recalls generate about $600 million in cost per recall. So it's significant. We hear that misplaced codes, either barcode placed on a curve or without the proper white space around it, renders a code illegible. We hear that color issues, high contrast, they don't have the high contrast they need, or that they're using a color like red, which doesn't scan with a laser scanner. We hear about poor print quality, and then disruptions like covered, peeling, folded, or faded barcodes. So those are barcode issues. Where our customers need to be able to support multiple languages for those that sell in other geographies. We also see a lot of challenges and problems coming around companies using fragmented labeling processes. So different systems in different countries, even in different parts of the warehouse. This leads to really poorly managed labeling. We see oftentimes when we come in, before we get everything straightened out in an organization, that people are storing their labels locally on their hard drive. And when somebody needs the label, they'll call up their buddy and say, hey, can you send me that label? Oh, sure. Now all of a sudden you have two labels where you should have one if you're going to manage the label properly. And then, you know, that of course escalates, and people, it's a very poor way to manage a labeling process. It's really hard to manage compliance and have a lean system if everybody's doing labeling their own way. It also creates tremendous challenges for change management. And you know, disparate ERP systems. If your facilities are using SAP, Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics, there has to be a way to tie them together, and this is a big challenge for our end users. Another challenge is complying with industry-specific nuances. Yeah, so for example, in the US, health science companies are FDA regulated, but FDA has different approach to pharma and medical device supply chain labeling and identification. Global expansion is another challenge. I think it's the seventh challenge. So let's think about automotive and aerospace, which run on component manufacturing. So first, second, and third tier suppliers can be located across an ocean from each other. There has to be a way for these companies to communicate via labeling. Has to be standardized, especially in the regulated industries where there are labeling compliance requirements. I think one of the happiest days for me in my present position was when one of the big 5 auto manufacturers decided that every one of their first and second tier suppliers had to buy and use Bartender for every component that went into their manufacturing facility, because they were seeing so many errors in labeling. They wanted to be able to push out that label format and have people not making stuff up on their own. I think the good news about these challenges is that they're not impossible. There are organizations that have met them and solved them all over the world. And we've actually built our software to help solve them. I mean, I think one of the differences, I don't want to brag, but I think we've made a concerted effort to really understand the needs in industry and the supply chain, and then tailor our software to help meet those needs.
So out of curiosity, one of the questions I'm asking everyone is, what is the most unusual, the oddest implementation or use case that you've come across to date?
Tagging camera bodies and lenses and so forth is one that I would never have perhaps conceived of for myself. So probably that's the strangest one I've seen. But I've certainly seen people try and do things in all sorts of circumstances. I was actually called in as a consultant to a very, very large company to help them look at why and how they would implement RAIN technology. And so I said, why? Why do you want to do this? Well, we hear it's the best thing to have. We think it might solve some of our problems. Well, that sounds good. So what are your problems? Well, we lose things. Now, actually, that sounds terrible, but it's actually probably a very common complaint for many, many companies. And by lose, I don't just mean stuff is stolen, though obviously that's something that does happen, but they've misplaced it. They know it's there somewhere. They have no idea where it is. Their current system doesn't tell them enough to know where it is. In this case, we were talking about something that was roughly 20 feet square by maybe 4 feet deep, and they'd lost a dozen of them. They knew they took delivery of them because they've got a record of taking delivery, but they can't find them. So they thought RFID was going to solve that problem for them. And I had to explain to them that using AIDC technologies is great and it can do a lot of things, but it doesn't solve bad processes. You've got to have a good process in place or be prepared to adapt your processes to be better to solve those kinds of problems. Technology can only go so far. If your system doesn't work to start with, changing technology is not going to make it work.
Pull out your crystal ball for probably the first of a number of times during this. What do you see as the most important reason for companies to adopt AIDC as we move forward into the future?
Well, first of all, who hasn't adopted it? It's pretty much everywhere. When I started a long time ago, barcode scanners were really expensive and you had to buy basically a mainframe computer to even deal with the data. And, now everyone has a barcode scanner in their pocket, and my little PC that's sitting here is, more powerful than, computers that fill the whole room, back in the 80s. I don't think it's a situation of, why would people adopt AIDC? I don't know any business of any size, even mom and pop shops that don't use barcodes in one form or another. But I think I'm going to change that question slightly to and I think you have another question, is what is possibly the big applications of AIDC in the future that I think are going to spur a greatly increased adoption of the technology. And that comes down to one word, which is serialization. When you have barcoding, identifying product packages, I'll use the supermarket application, for instance, that identity of a cereal box, which is called a GTIN, Global Trade Item Number, which is basically an identity of that type of product. That's well entrenched, and for cereal boxes, it works fine. But more and more, we want to see, or what industry wants to see, is more granularity in the data. And specifically for cereal boxes, you can look at the little numbers on the side that say Best By date or some type of a batch number. More and more that the vendors want to be able to scan that data, want to have that available at the point of sale, for instance. So if something is past its time or approaching its time, they can do automatic price markdowns or call it at the point of sale before it gets out into the public, or even scan it on the shelves. But when you get into items that can really be problematic, and in the food world, that would be fresh foods and produce and such. We all remember when, what was it, lettuce a couple years ago was tainted, and they had no granularity on the data, and they just had to recall pretty much, all the lettuce in a vast geographical area. It's happened with, chicken, and it basically, it pretty much happens, frequently. And each one of those occurrences is like a $10 million problem. And if you could have, you know, your product packaging, well, if you could just have a serialized barcode symbol on every package of whether it's fresh fruit or poultry or whatever, meats, cheeses, then if there is some type of a problem that's discovered, you know, I get sick, and then they say, oh, where did you get that? Well, you got it at supermarket A, you know, across the street. Well, where did they get it? By the time it works back, food has been out for, you know, days and maybe even weeks. And so that's what causes this gigantic problem. If, however, you know, I get sick and I can scan my package and tell the store it's serial number 12345, they can track it down through the supply chain to the exact, you know, farm at the exact time that it was packaged.
If you consider that AIDC has helped companies get competitive, I think competitiveness is a continuing issue. Things are getting tight, you know, margins are tighter, and people are expecting goods at lower and lower prices every day. I think product integrity as we go forward will be an issue. When you order something, you want to be sure that what you're getting is what you ordered, and that it came from the company that you thought was manufacturing it. Sometimes that's not necessarily true today. Globalization is a big thing that's going to be affecting how you view barcoding and standards like this. Being able to move your goods into global markets instead of just North America, et cetera, or whatever your market is, or just be able to expand and let your product be shared with other markets.
And one of the things, I'm working with an industry group right now in emerging technology, and I'm encouraging them to think this way, along with a lot of other people, is you need to really separate data content from data carrier. Your data content is what you want to standardize on, what you want to capture, the information you want, and that information you may be sharing with somebody. It may be a trading partner, it may be a consumer, it may be a regulatory body. The data carrier depends on how fast and what method you want to use for capturing that data. If you want to do a one-to-one, a one-to-many, a line of sight, non-line of sight, there's always going to be emerging data carriers that have specific use cases that may be attractive for your business needs.
So hopefully this has made sense. You have seen some of the reasons that companies adopt AIDC. The discussion about recalls and the associated expenses alone should really be enough of an argument to find a solution that will help limit or reduce those expenses. And as you can imagine, most companies can't really afford to waste $10 million or potentially more on doing something like a recall or having to deal with litigation due to someone being injured because of faulty parts or something along those lines. In the coming weeks, we will be posting other videos that discuss how the individual AIDC technologies work, as well as some of the standards that are used. So be sure to subscribe, ring the bell so that you're notified when the new content is delivered, and hopefully like this video. Once again, I would like to thank the Material Handling Education Foundation, AIM, and the AIDC 100 for making this video series a reality. My name is Kevin Barisso, and I look forward to seeing you at the next video.